Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you attending. As Brad mentioned, feel free to use the chat function to send questions, and I'll try to answer them as they come in. I'm going to be sharing, hopefully you can see on your screen, this presentation around really how to get your research used, right? So that we're not, wasting our energy. I feel like, well, I'll say, we've all probably, if we've been in the industry for any amount of time, we've been there where we've kind of just poured our blood, sweat, and tears into a project, into a research effort that ended up just sort of getting shelved or put in a drawer somewhere. We want to make sure that the work that we're doing has impact, especially, for those of you who are investing research dollars, right? You want to see that research get used and have an ROI. So the question is, how do we make sure those research dollars are kind of really do something to help drive the business forward? So I'm going to be talking today about a couple ways that we do that with our clients, or we have done that with our clients. And these are just some examples, like some little case studies that we'll walk through. But, there's lots of different ways you can do this. But one of the things, or kind of the element that we're going to focus on, is sort of the before and after, right? It's not just about the research. So I'm going to use a little football analogy. Apologies for those of you who are not sports fans. I'm going to use my New York Giants here to kind of demonstrate a little bit about what I mean, right? So it's not just the catch, right? If you're a wide receiver on a football team, your job is to catch the ball. That's your job. That's the core of what you do. But before you're out on the field ready to catch the ball, you need to be practicing. You need to be running routes. You need to be learning plays. You need to be doing all the stuff ahead of time, so that when it comes time to catch the ball, you catch the ball, right? And then in this analogy, this is us actually doing the research, gathering the data. But if you watch football, just catching the ball is great. But there's a statistic in football called yards after the catch, right? So that is, once you catch the ball, it's dodging those tackles, it's taking it forward, it's gaining yards, it's hopefully scoring a touchdown. And so we're going to talk about some of the things we do after the research, kind of in the activation bucket. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. The things you can be doing before, the foundational stuff, the getting that stakeholder buy-in, and then the stuff you can be doing after you've collected the research to really activate those insights. And I will say, in this previous year, that the NFL team that led the league in yards after the catch with an average of 13.6 yards, which is quite high, were the San Francisco 49ers, who, while they didn't win, did actually make it to the Super Bowl. So it did matter. Okay, so before the research, so what I'm calling foundation and buy-in. So we like to refer to this in Zeldis as phase zero, adding a phase zero to your research, right? A lot of times we do either multiple qual or qual quant, phase one, phase two. This is phase zero. This is what you're going to do beforehand. And I'm going to talk about three examples, three ways that we've done this. So one is an audit approach. Another is using crowdsourcing. And a third is kind of ideation. And we're going to talk about ideation on the back end, right, too, because that's also a form of activation. But there's some ideation you can do on the front end. All of this is really to help get stakeholder buy-in, to get people engaged in the research, to make sure the research is meeting whatever those real objectives are. And it's beneficial across the board, but it's especially beneficial when you've got a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? So when you've got a lot of stakeholders or different departments that are going to have, some vested interest in the research, these things can be even more helpful. So I'm going to talk about kind of our first case study, which is an audit approach. So in this study, the goal, we had a client come in, they wanted to completely revamp their CX program. This was a group benefits company. Their current state was that they were doing really more than 10 different research surveys in different departments with no consistency, no alignment, kind of everybody doing their own thing, right? So what we did, we created a phase zero. We did an audit of everything that was currently happening. And there were kind of two pieces of that. One was, let's look at all of the existing surveys to understand what's being asked, to make sure what's being asked is what's important, that's being asked consistently, and that we are finding any gaps, anything where it's not being covered anywhere. Alongside that, we did a series of 30-minute internal IDIs, dyads, and triads. That was across the board. Now, again, this was the CX program across the company. So we did that with different operations departments, call center. We did that with C-suite, with VPs. We wanted to understand what are the things that you need to know? What are the most important things you need to know to drive the business forward? What are the most important things you need to measure and track over time to see if you're making progress towards your goals? And we kind of combine that, again, with those surveys that were already being done. And so the outcome was really to understand what are the core things that we need to be covering, to streamline those surveys, to get those 10 surveys down to 3 or 4, which is what was really needed, to make sure that they were consistent and to cover all gaps, to make sure we were covering off on all of those things. So this was really important, right? You could come in and just start doing some sort of CX tracking, but this was a way for them to really revamp their program, to get input up and down from all the key stakeholders, and to make sure that they were going to be, very effectively changing this program. And I will say it was very successful. It really changed their organization to be measurement focused and to make data-driven decisions, which is the goal. So that's one example of an audit. Another example of an audit that we did is a little bit different, right? So in this case, we were asked to conduct a large-scale thought leadership study that was something new and different, right? It was going to get people's attention. It was going to be something unique and fresh. And this is pretty common, right? We have a lot of clients that want to be thought leaders. They want to do PR. They want to be able to put stuff out there that shows that they're leaders in the industry and that they're contributing to the industry as a whole. They don't want to spend time, energy, and money in doing something that we're then going to find out someone else already did, or that it overlaps, or it's something everyone already knows because it's been asked tons of times before. So what we did here, our phase 0, was a lit review, right? We went out, okay, we want to do, this was, and I can talk about it because it's PR, right? We were doing a study about women in finance, but we want to do something that's unique and different, something that hasn't been done before. So we don't want to ask the same questions. We don't want to get the same results. So we went through and looked at all the research that had been done. We gathered that, we synthesized that, and we talked about, okay, what is it that we know? And what is it that we still need to know? Where are the gaps? Where are the unknowns that we could contribute to the industry in this way? And then, create a questionnaire that addresses that content. And sometimes you still ask some of the stuff because you need it for context in the analysis. You still ask some things that you might know, but you want to then generate fresh content, which is what we did. So we, the lit review allowed us to make sure we weren't retreading old ground that had been tread before, and that we were creating a survey that was going to generate fresh content. And that led to pretty significant media pickup. People were interested. It was something they hadn't heard before. So 2 examples of kind of that audit approach in 2 different ways. So let's talk about one of the other pieces of foundation or buy-in work, and that is crowdsourcing. And this is, again, I mentioned cooks in the kitchen, right? When you've got different stakeholders and you want to make sure they're being heard, you want to make sure that the research you're doing is going to be useful to them and meet their needs. So this is going to help you get the buy-in from multiple stakeholders and constituencies. And I should say, this whole discussion, right? The reason I keep talking about buy-in is because I'm sure you've all seen, if you have buy-in from your business partners, it's more likely the research is going to get used on the back end, right? If they're invested and they're excited, then it's more likely they're going to take it and run with it. So in this case, we do every 2 years, we do a multi-sponsor, which is always a challenge, industry study where we work with a nonprofit organization, but they have buy-in from a number of different insurance carriers that all have ownership in this research. So we're talking about not just multiple stakeholders at one client company, but multiple companies here that need to have their voices heard. As you can imagine, I think my colleague calls, the first time we had to do the study, it was a bit of herding cats, right? Because you have a lot of different stakeholders at different companies that have different priorities because their organization may have different objectives than another organization. So very challenging. And we wanted to, this is a tracking questionnaire that we do every 2 years, but of course it evolves, it changes. So trying to get like feedback on this questionnaire and what should we add and what should we take out from all of these companies, right? How do we do that? So we did a research study. We did a phase 0 research study where these stakeholders were our respondents. So in this case, with this example, we did an online bulletin board discussion because these people are busy. It was hard to get them all scheduled at the same time, where they provided feedback on the questionnaire from the last wave. They had suggestions for their adds, edits, and deletes. They could see each other's, right? So they knew if their request was the only one who cared about X, that it probably wasn't going to happen, but they could see where there was consensus, what the hot button issues are, what they wanted to see included. And it created some additional discussion, right, on that bulletin board about why we should or shouldn't include this. And it really helped us kind of consolidate that feedback. We've also done this depending on the number of stakeholders. We've done a focus group type approach. We might call a workshop though, might not call it a focus group, where we've moderated to try to gather that feedback. We've done a survey to just try to prioritize the content for the research. And the result, we were able to streamline the questionnaire development process, get all that feedback, get more agreement and consensus through this, which made everybody feel like their voices had been heard and everybody feel like they had what they needed in the questionnaire to meet their objectives, which is going to make it, again, more useful for everybody, more actionable for everybody on the back end. The last kind of foundation or pre-phase 0 that I want to talk about is ideation. Now, again, I mentioned ideation is something we do on the back end, on the activation side, but we also do it sometimes ahead of time, again, to get stakeholders involved, to get them thinking about what they think they're going to get out of the research and what they want to get out of the research, to have them build hypotheses that can then be tested. So in this case, that's exactly what we were doing. We were exploring hypotheses and assumptions around buyer personas and behaviors, right? So we were doing a study around why people do and don't buy and different buyers and what their priorities were. So we had the stakeholders in this research. We used something called Mural, which is a software tool online to brainstorm assumptions around buyer attitudes, behaviors, and then we use that feedback to, obviously to build a discussion guide for the research, but also to set up assumptions to be tested. Because if you have people with ideas or hypotheses, I think X, they want to know if their ideas are right or wrong. So they're going to be paying attention to the output because it's clearly laid out what they're trying to get feedback on. So we were able to create a buyer map from these hypotheses, right? From this ideation on the front end, we created a buyer map, and then we used that buyer map in the qualitative research to test against, to validate, to basically find areas where it wasn't accurate, but to test those hypotheses. And I can tell you, like in this case, the stakeholders were just kind of riveted because they had built this, they had built their hypotheses, and they wanted to see what was accurate and what wasn't. So it was pretty impactful. So those are some of the befores, right? Things to get people really involved, to get people focused on the objectives, and to make sure the research is focused on what it should be focused on, to basically optimize the chance that it's going to be used. So now you've got the middle, right? You're collecting the data, you're doing your qual, you're doing your quant, you're generating great insights. You're putting those insights out there, you're sharing those. But what's next? What do we do after the research? How do we make sure it doesn't sit on the shelf? How do we make sure we're doing something with it? So again, I'm going to talk about 3 different examples, 3 different categories that we talk about. There's lots of ways to do this. I presented this at a conference, and I got a lot of great discussion about other things people had done. So there's sort of countless ways to do this. But the key is to do something, right? To get people excited, to make sure that they're going to carry the ball forward. So 3 things we're going to talk about on this side. The first is dissemination, right? Making sure the insights are being disseminated throughout the organization where they need to be to actually increase the chances that somebody's going to use them. Illumination, so kind of bringing the insights to life, making them come, connecting them to actual people, so they're not just numbers on a page. And then again, ideation, which we already talked about, but again, we're going to talk about it here as well. And all of this really is about bringing the research to life. It's making it be heard, making it be relevant, relatable, and then helping it take the business to the next step about, creating the solutions that are going to help whatever that the problem may be, right? Get more customers, sell more, improve the service experience, whatever that might be. So let's talk about a case study example of how we've done dissemination. So the goal here was to allow a broader base of stakeholders to hear directly from in this case, small business owners. That was the audience that we were talking to. So we had done qualitative research with small business owners. And the immediate research stakeholders loved it. They were in the back room. And I'm going to take a step back, because one thing, I don't have in this presentation, and this is part of the middle, right? This is part of doing the research. But I've been in this business for more than 25 years. And I will say nothing gets people engaged more than listening to Qual Live. Then whether that's, old school in the back room behind the mirror or online, whatever it is, being able to hear from their audience directly. I've had so many stakeholders just have these aha moments and get so excited, from my immediate research client up through, CMOs and C-suite, just really getting just lighting a fire when they hear qualitative research. So aside from the before and after here, in the during, if you can get people to listen live, especially nowadays, we're doing a lot of our qual online where the client can be chatting with the moderator live. And so that's been so exciting for folks to be able to kind of follow up on something they hear and, make sure that's getting covered and following a trail. It really makes them so active in their research and gets them really excited about it. So that's a little bit of an aside. Here, this is what happened, right? We did the qual. We had the immediate stakeholders in the back room, and they just were so jazzed by what they heard that they wanted everyone. They wanted the broader organization to have that same experience. So basically what we did is we staged a focus group. We invited a more vetted panel of these SBOs. So we got the best of the best, right? Based on what we had heard in the qual research we'd already done. We narrowed the focus on kind of the prototypical, the best folks. And we called it a roundtable discussion, but basically it was a moderated live focus group in front of a huge audience, where it was certainly vetted, the guide was narrowed to highlight the findings, the things that were most important from the qualitative research we had done. We focused in on that. So we made a tighter kind of discussion. And, we held that in front of a huge audience, like you would at a conference, right? With a roundtable discussion. And then in that same setting, after they heard that, we then broke out and did ideation sessions. So we're going to talk a little bit more about ideation, but we use that in combination here. So we did basically this performative focus group, and then we broke people out to help ideate directly after that. Because again, the initial stakeholders really felt this is how they were going to get people excited about the research. It created that personal interaction. And so that's what happened, right? Seeing that research live, hearing directly from their SBO audience made it memorable. It made it actionable on a wider scale. It got more people excited about it. And then going right from that to the ideation, which you don't usually do, right? You do qual and then you get a report, and then this was we see it and now we're going to go ideate. And so that was really impactful for this organization to help then take the ideas and move forward with them. Talking about illumination, sure many of you, in this case, we had done a segmentation. And this is, when I presented this is what came up the most is this relevance to making a segmentation actionable, because many of you may have, like me, had experiences where segmentation, it's a lot of effort, it's an investment, and then nobody did anything with the segmentation. So I think this is one of the most important situations where you want to activate the research and you want to optimize your chances that your segmentation is going to get used. So in this case, we wanted to bring the segments to life for the stakeholders and broader folks who weren't directly involved with the research and who didn't have that experience. So we had a segment cocktail hour. So we recruited consumers who were sort of, again, the sort of best fit for each of our segments that we had created through the research. And we had them at cocktail tables with like a little card that said which segment they are. And a lot of senior leadership and stakeholders came to the cocktail party and they walked around to meet and mingle and ask questions of these segments. And we had some starters. We gave them some suggestions of questions to ask, but they could ask whatever they want. And they kind of went around and had conversations with these different segments so they could understand these folks. And, really like identify the segment with an actual human being. This experience was so memorable. I think it was 4 years ago. They talk about it in every meeting that we have. It was so impactful for them. It just comes up over and over again. It comes up every time they're doing concept development, which is segmentation should, right? You should be thinking about which segments and how you're going to communicate with those segments and how you're going to appeal to those segments with different ideas and concepts. Just another kind of twist on this that we did with another client. We did something very similar, but they hired actors because, as you know, in a segmentation, no one is perfectly that segment, right? Like there's always like they fit this and that, and they're 80% in that segment. In this case, you could hire people and you could say, this is who you are. Here's the segmentation. Here's all the information about you. You can demographically cast them, and then you can tell them all the things that are important to them and how they think and how they feel. And that actor will take that and really personify that segment in a way that in some ways is unrealistic, but it like really makes the segment shine. Okay, the last kind of piece, I mentioned ideation. I've mentioned it a couple times. I mentioned it earlier in the dissemination example and some of the ideation we did beforehand. This is probably what we do most often, and maybe because Zeldis does do a lot of concept and product development work, but we do a lot of ideation, and so important if you're going to do, especially you're going to do kind of needs or jobs to be done research, to then be able to take that and turn it into actual ideas that you can then test and move forward with, hopefully successfully. So in this case, we wanted to leverage research findings to develop products, messaging, digital experiences for this client's target consumer. We had a workshop with about 30 people from multiple departments. We're using design thinking. If you don't know what design thinking is, you can Google it, but it really helps you kind of develop ideas and test them and take them through a cycle. In this case, we were using empathy mapping, need statements, big idea vignette exercises. There's lots of different ideation exercises out there. I'm happy if you reach out to me after this to like send you some examples of stuff we've done, but honestly, none of that's proprietary to us. Like you could Google and find design thinking, and you can find ideation, like exercises that you can do. When I did the dissemination one, I talked about ideation there. This was the opposite, right? We did the ideation, but we also did some dissemination here because we were asked, once we did the workshops and we came up with the ideas and concepts, this particular company has a regular webcast they do to their employees, and we leverage that webcast to share the results with the full organization. So they knew kind of what we had learned, but also how we were going to put those, into the field, into ideas that we were going to test, so they could get some feedback from employees and get people engaged. We then were able to embed kind of personas into the company thought process, because that was one of the things that came out of the research. And then we were able to kind of build on the ideas that were uncovered. We were able to create new product design, messaging, some new concepts that, then went forward in later research. And I am happy to say some of them actually launched, which is, as a researcher, especially on the supplier side, it's like so great when you do something and then you found out, oh yeah, we just launched this, and it went forward, because that's the dream. That's why you're doing what you're doing. So, again, this is probably what we do most often between when we do qualitative sort of white space gaps, jobs to be done research, to taking that and then doing a workshop with our clients to then turn that into actual concepts that we're going to then quant test and move forward with. So, those are kind of some of the case studies that we've done. It's just kind of a tiny piece. Like I mentioned, when I presented, I had lots of folks kind of give examples of things that they had done, either similar, a little bit different, but ways that they've kind of brought the research to life to make sure that the stakeholders are not just gonna, oh, that was great, those are such good insights, this was really helpful, and then nothing happens. But to really see it come to life and see how it's being used. I mentioned before, if you wanted to follow up with me to talk about some ideation stuff. Oh, I didn't mention this, but when we do ideation, we do a workshop. One of the most common things we do is we present and share the research findings, right? We present our research report, and then we actually give stakeholders homework. Usually that homework involves taking what they've learned from the insights to start thinking about ideas and concepts. So I have some examples of that too, if you want me to share kind of homework we've given stakeholders to help start the ideation process, right? And then we consolidate that beforehand and bring those into the workshop so that we're not starting from scratch in the workshop. People have done some background work so that we can hit the ground running in the workshop with the other ideas that we're doing, or the other activities that we're doing. So again, happy to share that. You have my email. It's also probably in the webinar invite. Definitely follow up with me if you have any questions or you want any follow up. Thank you so much.